All right, I'm going to jump right into it. So when I like to talk about something, I like to talk about something that I haven't heard enough people talk about. So if there's going to be some questions at the end, as long as I don't keep talking. I have about 50 slides, so we kind of got to go fast. But you can. I'm just kidding. I talk fast anyway. I want to make sure that whatever I say is simple enough that you folks can go do something with it. Because all of you, majority of you, sorry, not all of you, are product people. And so it's important to me, and I'm going to keep looking up there too, because you folks are staring down at me, so what's up? And I've been here all day, so it's been fun. Thank you, everybody that works here, and everyone that I met for inviting me today, and everyone that organized and runs the group. I'm having a blast so far, so hopefully all of you will too. So what I was saying is, if anything is complicated, anything is not simple, anything's confusing, or or you feel like after this you can't go take something I said and go do something with it, then I did a terrible job. So let's make sure that doesn't happen. So ask me some questions. I tell you to interrupt me, but then this will take a very long time. So save your questions for the end. So this is what I see a lot, and I know it's kind of blocked off here, and I'm a little particular. So actually, I don't think I have slides that are that low, so we're going to be okay. All right, see, I don't have to fix it. Tony's going to fix it. Thanks, Tony. It's not a big deal. I don't think I have slides that are down there or copy down there. All right, so, this is what a product person's supposed to do, right? Find problem, solve problem all day long. So thanks, Tony. So this is what I see happen a lot at most of the meetings I attend, and I end up attending a ton of meetings across many different departments, across many different companies, as well as my own. And this is the last thing I want to see happen. So this is one of the reasons why we're talking today. And on product teams, if you're measuring stuff, hopefully this never is happening to you, and usually it looks a little flat or something like that, which is even worse sometimes because you don't even know that something's wrong. So my co-founder and I have been sharing everything we do and learn about product on a newsletter, and it's called producthabits.com. And this is actually one of the main reasons I'm here, because Tony, who works here at BCG DV, ended up being on my email list, and then he thought I was in LA because our PO box for our companies are still in Cerritos. And so he hit me up and said, hey, come meet with us, come talk at this event that I'm associated with, or at this event. And I said, yeah, why not? It's LA, and I'm a fan, and I haven't been here in a while, and let's do this. So if you get nothing else today, you will find a lot of value in the emails that my co-founder and I send. There's a weekly newsletter I send broken into multiple categories. And then there's emails we send that we will do things like do user tests on a bunch of sites on their onboarding, and then we'll tell you about everything we learned, and more importantly, exactly how we did it, the questions we asked and how we set it up and all that. And we did the same for pricing surveys. We have one I'm going to talk about in a second that we just did last week that Tony had some strong opinions on, because he always does. I'm going to keep making fun of him while I'm going, partly because I spent all day with him. So what we did is we took 51 job postings for product managers, senior product managers and product managers, mostly product managers, and these are all of our insights that we learned. And this is the kind of stuff we do. We manually analyze this. It took somebody a total of 3 days to take all the job listings and analyze them. It's similar to what we consider a lot of things qualitative research. So we literally broke it down, built a bunch of charts and graphs, and then wrote, I don't know, like a 2,500 word email or something with it. The thing at the bottom was the reason I'm here and on talking about this topic, which is retention was absent from all the job postings. It just didn't exist. Nobody mentioned it at all. And when you think about a product, you even think about a product like food at a restaurant. If you go once and you don't come back again, did you really go? I think that's how it works with a product. So I find that kind of disturbing, and I want to make sure that we as product people are thinking about retention a lot more than we're thinking about other things. So what is retention? So it's measured as the percentage of people who come back to a product in a given period of time, daily or weekly. Pretty simple. Fair enough, right? I haven't found simple explanations for retention either. That's why I had 2 of them. What is retention? Retention is measured in cohorts. Cohorts are groups of people who start with the product on a specific date or date range. Simple as that. Again, super simple. I haven't heard it written that simply. And it really bugs me because nobody really knows what retention is. Even these explanations don't really do it justice on how important it is and what it means. So now I'm going to go get a little fancier. So, you know, these are the cohorts are here, and these are the percentage of people that are retained based on the day 0. So this is usually a retention graph is a time-shifted graph. Time-shifted means it starts with people's experience from day 0 of the product and across some amount of time. And so this is some time period I picked in some graph on some product that I knew had very good day 1 and day 2 retention. I mean, like literally they're like 50% day 2, which is very good. And then, and this product specifically, and most products are not even like this. Usually it's like a big dip all the way down to like 10%, and then it's kind of flat, and then it ends up going to 0. So there's products that are usually worse than this. This one, though, is a little deceiving. That's why I put it here. Because if you looked at it for the first 30 days, it looks really, really good. It looks really good. It looks like they're going to hit like 30, 40% retention. But if you look at it all the way past like day 90 and onwards, they're flattening out. It might even go back to 0. So basically what this means is only 6 people out of 100 that started using the product, and this is a free product. It's actually a mobile app. They have Android and iOS, and this is a mix of that. But basically 6 people basically 90 days later showed up, are still there if 100 showed up on day 0. This product has hundreds of thousands of monthly active users. It's because their top of funnel is really, really good. So this company looks like it's doing well because they have hundreds of thousands of monthly active users. But if you start really playing this out and fast forward it, their user base can actually go to 0 because they don't have retention. Because 90 days later, all those people are going to be gone. So that 500-something thousand, once they get to the 90-day mark, is going to be a much lower number cohorted. These are the things that are hiding in our data that we can't see. So this company actually thinks they're okay, believe it or not. I've talked to them. It's okay. Like, this is a hidden problem for them. But when I look at it, I'm like, oh, this is like one of those, like what they call a hair on fire problem. And it's hidden because they get so many new users every day that it's easy for them to feel like okay. But if they looked at users that were, you know, started in January, only 6% of those people barely are probably still there. Much lower probably. Okay, so this is not so great retention, a little better. Here's how I look at retention. I'm sure these graphs are familiar to you to some extent, and you probably don't know how to analyze them very well, most of you, because like I barely know how to analyze them, but I'm going to do my best here on the simplest way that I've found to analyze them. You look at any time period, so this is up to day 30. You go to the middle of the graph, and you say, okay, that's 12%. Cool. So by the middle of this time period, there's 12% of people who showed up on day 0 or day 1 that are still here. Great, or still around. Then you look at day 30, that's 8.7%. So you're basically talking about, you know, like a 35+% drop from the middle of the period all the way to the end of it. And that can tell you that, okay, it's not going down to 6%, it's not completely going to 0 yet, but it's probably, there's a chance it goes to 0, but like if you look behind this curve and it's like looking a little flattened out, maybe you're okay, maybe you're gonna stay at 8.7. But this isn't a business that you wanna grow. This is a business where you look at it and you're like, we have some work to do, some real work to do. It might not be as bad as the other business, but it's about the same actually, because the other business at least has a lot of top of funnel traffic, so you can do a lot of fun stuff like experimentation, A/B tests, and things like that because you have a lot of volume. This business might not have that much volume, and they probably have a bunch of pivoting and whatnot to do, but I'll get into what you can do about it too later. So this is better retention, because it might not be 50% on day 1, but it looks like it's going to start flattening out at some point, you know, and it's probably going to hit somewhere around the 20s and stay pretty stable, because going from 29.8 in day 15 to 23 in day 30, it's still a drop, you know, it's just not as dramatic of a drop as the previous one. And the number is already still pretty high. So you can tell that this one might flatten out. But either way, you have enough time in those 30 days with enough people that there's a lot of signal here. And you might be thinking you're crazy, like I don't see retention numbers that are super high and things like that. But like when you look at the fastest growing companies out there, they all have super high retention. Facebook has super high retention. Instagram has super high retention. A lot of the B2B products like Gmail have super high retention. So this is no joke. It just takes a lot of work. So what does good retention get us? It gets us all these great things. We get people coming back, obviously. People tell their friends. People share on social media. People engage with their emails. You get 5-star ratings. And like I said, so much more. The key here, though, is that if you want to gauge a product's retention, one of the easiest ways is to actually look at some of these things. Are people telling their friends? So are your friends telling you about a product? Are you hearing about a product from friends? Are people sharing on social media? Right? One of the categories I'm in is like one of my products connects to all the document apps. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. And when we study some of these document apps, we're actually looking at some of the newer ones. For example, Notion is a newer one, Airtable is a newer one. And we're just typing it in Twitter and seeing what people are saying and what the volume of that is. And that can already give us a pretty general good thesis that there's some decent amount of retention going on if there's enough volume and enough positive sentiment. And more importantly, you can even dig in deeper if you want to and really look at what people are saying. So if they're talking about use cases for the product, then you know that it's likely this product is being retained. Then if you think about those use cases and go deeper, you can say, are these use cases that I think are repetitive? Because if those use cases that people are talking about, 1, they're talking, 2, they're talking about use cases, and 3, if they're talking about use cases that you can imagine people are using every day the product for, then basically you can imply that they have some level of decent, if not great, retention. So this is why retention gets you these things. So this is the way I like to say it. Good retention is a gift that keeps on giving. And that means when you don't have it, you don't have any gifts. There's no gifts under the tree. There's no Christmas. Sorry to be crude, but it's true. I didn't have Christmases growing up. Not for any particular reason, but I didn't. So it's kind of very visceral. My kids have Christmas every year. It's great. Lots of gifts. Good retention. Good retention leads to more organic growth, more customer engagement, more feedback to guide your product roadmap, more positive reviews and ratings, more time to focus on long-term sustainable growth. That's the longest one and probably my favorite one, because when you have high retention, you get time. You get time because people are willing to pay for your product. People are willing to do all kinds of things for you, right? Like all these things that I said. But the biggest thing is like you get time to go build something that lasts. And then you get more revenue. So this is my big thesis. And if any of you were paying attention, I skipped it on the first slide. But to me, all these things, the reason retention matters is because it's a result of customer obsession. So when you think about retention, you can think about it as what many would call like a lagging indicator. Those graphs are a lagging indicator of engagement, of people actually utilizing the product. And when you think about what's going to get that sort of, what are the leading indicators, to me, the high level of the leading indicators are some level of customer obsession. And that really happens because you're doing the work you're doing the work to get the customer obsession, and you're being obsessed with the customer. And that's kind of like a symbiotic thing. So I'm not going to talk about hugging it out or anything like that, don't worry, with your customer, although that could be a good thing in some cases. So the way I think about customer obsession is that it's when your customer needs are greater than your business needs. So you're actually willing to think through the difference between those two things, because they're not usually thought about in a lot of companies. They're kind of like mushy. And then customer benefits are greater than product features. I think I'll give more examples of this, but this one's really an important point because we tend to want to keep building features. It's just our nature for newness and wanting to do all kinds of things that are innovative and exciting. And lately, the word that keeps coming to mind for me is like literally you're grinding it out. When you want to improve these things, you're grinding it out. You're not like thinking about the next exciting big feature. You're actually thinking about the next minor iterative improvement you can make that actually might be high leverage and cause some big changes, or good enough that it helps you get closer to the goal of high retention. So this one's really important to me because I see too many folks focused on features even today after many years of doing this, and convincing them that the customer problem and the benefit is a lot more important than the feature. And there's a lot of nuances there, which I'll get into. So I have a 3-step process for customer obsession and for you to be able to get it, because 3s are good. And I wanted to leave you with something that's tangible and something that I sort of feel like will give you something that you can go do. And if you take these steps, then you'll start improving retention. Yeah, it sounds simple, but you'll see how hard it is. So you start with the customer journey. And what this means to me is really about splitting retention into the time periods across the customer journey. And it's really about time periods on that graph I was showing. So I break it down like this. There's retention, there's short-term, mid-term, and there's long-term. And the time periods are week 1 is short-term, and then weeks 2 to 4 are mid-term, and weeks 5 plus are long-term. Do any of you work on like a game? Okay, one person. Great, you've worked on a game before, right? We talked about this earlier. This time period's a little bit different on a game. Short term is like day 1. 1/7/30. Yeah, 1/7/30, because if you don't have them by 30, you're done, right? So it's a little bit different for a game, but most everything else, it's about like this, including even consumer products like Facebook, because you're going to be there for the long haul. The reason for this is games have a way shorter life cycle of even usage, right? Most games. So that's why the time period is squeezed, but most things, this will work. So short-term retention, these are the 2 key things that you're going for. So do people use the product after their first session? How many times do people use the product in the first week? This is what you care about. You don't really care about anything else. You're trying to figure out what they're doing right after the first, like how many times they're using it after the first session, if they're even using it, and you're basically analyzing that. And then you're looking to figure out how many times do people use it in the first week. This stuff's really interesting, and I'm going to get into how you figure this stuff out in a minute too. Midterm is all about, does it solve a painful enough problem for people? And is the problem a frequent one that people have? And you can already take these questions and start looking at your own product that you're working on and think through whether these things are true about your product. And if they're not in any of these questions, then you know where to go discover more and figure out like what's going on and why this is not the case. And then long term, is a product a part of people's daily life and or workflow? This one's really critical because long term, if it's not part of their life every day, it's probably not going to last. And I know that sounds ridiculous. I say a lot of ridiculous things. Oh, hey, my product can't be used every day, blah, blah, blah. Sure it can't. Like, you just haven't thought about it the right way. Like, challenge me later if you want to. I've had fun talking about this. But you don't get to have a long-term business these days without having daily retention. I'll tell you the one exception that's not really an exception. The one exception are products that are basically anti-usage products, and retention would be measured differently. So an example of an anti-usage product is, are any of you, I'm assuming all of you are familiar with Zapier? Yeah, okay. So Zapier is kind of an anti-usage product. Yes and no, but basically. I have a more crude way of saying it. My crude way of saying it is it's like plumbing. So Zapier is like plumbing. You set it up, and if it stops working, you're going to go fix it. You can't live without it. So thus, it is a daily use product, because the second Zapier stops working doing something that you set up, you're going to be pissed off. It's like your water not working, or it's like your plumbing in your toilet not working, right? Something's going to happen that's going to be like, oh, it broke, I better go fix it. But it's still, if you think about that, it's still in your workflow, and it's still something you rely on daily. So most of us don't have products like that, and they require you to actually use them. So that example is more of an exception, but if you happen to be in a space where you can build a product where after the first session, people are creating something, setting something up, and literally it turns into a daily need or a daily use thing that they don't have to do anything for in order to get the benefit, you're probably going to be able to scale in a much different way and potentially much faster than a lot of other products, because in that first session, you have the opportunity to expose as many people as possible to the one thing that's going to get you retention, which is them setting up something really important to them. Okay, so that was journeys and splitting up the journey, which I really don't see enough people doing. And then the second one is about working backwards from the customer. So this is something from Amazon. How many of you are familiar with working backwards? Okay, cool. So I'm going to teach some of you something. That's cool. I feel good about that. So I'm going to read this out because it's pretty cool. So what they do at Amazon is we try to work backwards from the customer rather than starting with the idea for a product and trying to bolt customers onto it. This is probably the thing that's my favorite product development tool that is actually easy. It's not hard, and it also forces really good habits. So this is a kind of more thorough explanation of it, but ultimately, what you're doing is you're iterating on a marketing asset or even a product marketing asset even before you write a single line of code, even before you design anything. So you're probably wondering, like, how do you do that? Well, like, you do that by doing research. So this forces you to do research. And if you're gonna do research, which you better be doing research if you're working on product, then you better have a good reason to do it. And a really good reason to do it is basically learning what this amazing experience needs to be for your customers. And Amazon does that because they're in a world where press releases are where it's at. So when I read this, I was like, I don't like press releases. We don't really do them. We're not a type of business that does them. And so we started doing this with launch blog posts. We even did it with launch tweets. We did it with launch LinkedIn posts. We did it with things that we would use to communicate with our customers. And that started working really well. So what ends up happening is you end up iterating the crap out of this document until everyone's like, oh, that sounds like an amazing experience. And it doesn't matter. You don't worry about how hard it is. You don't worry about engineers getting involved in it yet. You just worry about what is that experience that when we read it, and it's backed by the research we've done, that we're like, oh, that's where it's at. Like this is an experience that aligns with what we learned in research that people are gonna just love and need to have and want to have. And so my example of this is at Amazon. A friend of mine worked on, used an example with me when I talked to him, and he was telling me how they do it, and he was using the example of Amazon Video. All of you are somewhat familiar with it, right? So Amazon Video, what they do is they show you the characters and the actual actresses and actors in the interface. That was discovered through customer research and a press release like this. Every other piece of Amazon's video experience is not unique, right? It's the same. It's the same things. It's like you go to Netflix, you get the same thing. You go to Hulu, you get the same thing. That one piece, no one else has replicated, and they went to great lengths to replicate it because they actually had to get, this is what I heard, the names of these people. A lot of the movies, they had like random people, like, you know, and they had to actually get their approval to get their name in there and things like that. And they went all the way and did that because they realized that in order for their experience to be differentiated enough where people would use it and then retained with it because people found that thing they loved and wanted was by adding this into it. So it's that big of a deal when you find it. And if you think about it, like, you wouldn't intuitively think about video and movies and TV shows and be like, oh, we're gonna do that. And it's gonna be incredible and everyone's gonna love it. No, you would learn that by actually doing research and figuring out, oh, this is what people care about. This is what they're trying to do and they can't do it anywhere else and it's painful. And the people that are crazy, like fans of different folks or whatever, they'll do it, but everyone else doesn't have access to this and they can't do it. So let's give them access to it and give them those moments of delight. So that's what this whole process is about and that's why this is so important. So this is a full breakdown of it. I have my deck, which I'll send out, and you folks can send it to the email list. I have links there, but you know, Tony did an okay job because he didn't move that chair. It's cool though. It's all good. And no one's got their computers open and all that, so it doesn't matter. But I have links to all this stuff so that you can see it and learn more and all that. Anyway, so this is the process. It's very thorough, and it talks about their press release. So we took this to another level more recently, and for those of you that don't know, there's a site called Product Hunt. And it shows daily products every day that are launching. It's one of my favorite sites. And we started creating fake Product Hunt launch pages that basically had everything we needed in them for our launch before we actually launched the product. Because it's one of our key moments in our business that when we put out a product. And we basically went even further, and we would do that, and then we would run a user test, so 5 people, 10 people on video, talking through that Product Hunt landing page, everything that they said they'd click on and all that stuff, and then they'd even click on to the actual product or a mock-up of it, and we would learn everything they have to say about it and whether the experience matched up, and that helped us iterate the Product Hunt page so that we maximize the votes, because it's a voting site, basically. More votes you get, more awards you get, like top product of the day and whatnot, and more clicks you get. So it was an experience we did. So we take this to heart and try to do this as much as we can. And we do it early in our product development process and even later on as we need to learn like how to position something or how to message it. You folks get my thing now, so I had to go there. Okay, but it's going to get better, hopefully. Okay, so this is the graph, or the chart with the retention and time periods. These are the key questions that I like to ask. I know I had questions before, but these are key questions that I'm going to show you what you can do about these things. So for all three. And then this is what the goal is. And I'll talk through each of these goals as well. So short term, what you really care about is why are people not using the product? And your goal in the short term of week 1 is get them to use it more than once. They're already going to use it once because they're coming up and they're signing up. We're going to assume that if people won't use your product once, we have a bigger problem, and you need to do something about it. That's fine. That's I think what we call marketing, and nobody in the room is marketing, so we're good to go as far as I know. We don't need to talk about marketing, right? I talked about marketing for like 15 years. Okay, so basically this is a template of an email that we send at one of my companies to learn why people are not using your product. And I'm going to break down every section in the email. This email is something I shared with the product habits list, and we tried, not a dozen versions and not 100. So it's somewhere between a dozen and 100 of very different versions of the email to figure out which one's going to get the highest response rate. And so the first thing, it says, quick question. Funny thing, we sent this email to the email list and told people how to write this email, and then somebody tweeted randomly, like a day or two later, I'm getting all these emails from salespeople with the subject, quick question. Damn, all right, I gotta be careful with that. So, because it'll get worn out, right? So now what I do is I actually drop the Q. The Q isn't uppercase, it's lowercase. I didn't tell anyone that one, I'll tell all of you that one works a little bit better. So I give them context of who I am and what I do, kind of. Then I give them context of what they did. Then I tell them, this is the quick question, which is, I want to know why you haven't been using it. And we don't pose it as a question on purpose because we don't want to make them feel like we're asking for anything. This is on purpose as well. We learned that works better, especially when you say, please reply to this email and let me know. And that, that stuff has to be bolded and whatnot. Because when they look at that, they're like, well, what am I replying to? Then they go back to the sentence up there if they don't remember, and they read that one again. And that's really important. So we noticed that in the way people were treating this. And then we tell them what we're going to do for them, just to remind them what this product can do for them. And then, some of the nice stuff. And then the PSs are always good. All the marketers will tell you PSs are useful. Just don't use them in every email you send to the same person, because then they'll ignore it. And so that's really good, because telling people you actually care is great, apparently. All right, so that was that. I would urge you to go send an email like that instead of a welcome email, a generic welcome email. And I would do it for folks, obviously, who don't come back like a day or two later, but basically within the first week. It is like everything else with email, where your response rate will be higher the sooner you do it. But obviously, they're not going to come back an hour later in most products, so you want to do it about 24 hours or later. And depending on when you do it, you also get different insights. If you do it 3 days later, you'll get a little bit of a different perspective from those people. You do it 24 hours later, you'll get a little bit of a different perspective. Like 24 hours later, I've heard, hey, you didn't give me enough time. I don't have this opportunity to come back yet, blah, blah, blah. And that's actually interesting, because I'd rather have them come back every minute if they would, right? So you get to learn a lot of interesting things. So this is about weeks 2 to 4, which is about making the product a habit of some kind for people. I find this one interesting because I'm sharing a book called Hooked by this gentleman named Nir and Ryan Hoover, who started Product Hunt, and they have these things in there. I haven't found a good book on habits for products. I've read this book too. I haven't found a good book on habits for products. I read this book too. And this is the best book on the topic, because nobody's really written in a concise, simple way on how to create habits out of a product. I will never write that book, because I don't think anyone would truly write that book that knows how to do it, because it's in a way, it's a secret. So what I would say about this, and what I've learned about this topic, is this is still a good book to read in general for product development, because it has all these frameworks and theories, and it has a lot of good examples. One of the things that I've learned about product development is that I actually want to hear things from a practitioner that's sort of doing things now, or doing things in the last couple years. And the reason is things change super fast in terms of the tactics. And the frameworks might be similar, like certain ones like working backwards and stuff like that are really great. But really, when it comes to things like habits, like the world's changing pretty fast. Our habits are changing fast. The things that we're inundated with every day are changing fast. So no book can be actually written to actually do this topic justice beyond some frameworks and stuff. So they provide some good ones. My tip on it, though, has to do with spending a lot more time in your research, understanding how people are doing things and how often they're doing things, and how painful and you could say urgent those needs are. And that is an assessment that requires you to actually listen to them, hear their voice, get stories from them, and things like that. So proper research to me when you do interviews or surveys is when you can convince people to tell you stories. And then when you can take 20 stories you hear from 20 different people and start pattern matching what the most popular ones are, what the most painful ones are, and things like that. And it's a process. And it's not something that I think is actually talked about a lot. But at the end of the day, what you're trying to figure out is the basics of usage and frequency, and you want to learn how that works for whatever you're trying to solve for people. And this is why I told you that if you point me to a product and you say there's no daily use opportunity, I will come up with one. Because I will do the research, or I will just think in my head, here are the few opportunities you have for that type of business or that type of product where daily use, you can come up with something for daily use in the long run. Okay, so that's my shitting on habits and all that crap. Okay, so this is long-term, and this is some of the most powerful work that I've done, which is in 2015, I did a survey of 700 people, asked them about 10-ish questions about Slack, and 731 responded. And this question is a question that was invented by a gentleman named Sean Ellis, who also is one of the folks that invented the term growth hacker. So he kind of knows what he's talking about, and then now he doesn't because growth hacking doesn't exist, I don't think, anymore. There's no marketers in the room, so I can say whatever I want. So what he says is you want 40% or more of people saying they'd be very disappointed if your product no longer existed and you have some level of product market fit. Because product market fit is this thing that's out there, that's a concept. For me, it's not really about this question, although the question's great. By the way, I recently did another survey on Slack. So here it's 51%, they have product market fit. I did a survey recently, so that's 4 years later. That number's about 26% right now. So they actually don't have product market fit at the scale that they're at. And one of the main reasons for that is like, they were original back then. Now they're not original. And there are things that they probably could have done to basically still have that strong sentiment that they're not doing. I don't know what those things are. I haven't studied enough, but this kind of surveying with a bunch of the other questions that you would ask would help you get those answers. And this is really about long term. So what you want to do is survey folks who have been using the product for 2 to 4 weeks, and you ask this question plus questions like, would you recommend this product to a friend? Yes, no. This is not MPS. This is just a yes, no. You get a score. But really, the reason you ask them that is you're priming them for the next question. The next question is, how have you described the product to a friend? Or how did you describe it when you recommended it? The reason you're doing that is because you basically take these 3 buckets and you look at the responses to those questions, to that question and a bunch more against those buckets. So basically what you start discovering when you do that is that people who would be very disappointed are saying very different things to other people about the product than people who would be somewhat disappointed, or people who wouldn't be who wouldn't be disappointed at all if it no longer existed. So what you want to do is ask a question like this specific question, and ask a bunch of open-ended questions. And if you go to right here, bit.ly/slack/pmfit, you'll see a whole breakdown of us doing this survey, every single question we asked, and what we learned about Slack. What we learned in 2015 is that out of all those groups of people, when we asked them how could Slack be better improved to meet your needs, the number one thing all groups said was video conferencing. That was 4 years ago, and they lagged a little bit on that, and still apparently their video conferencing sucks, and they cut some parts of it out, and now it's Zoom. So in theory, if they wanted to keep product market fit, they would have added video conferencing really aggressively. And maybe they would have been able to add a couple Bs to their valuation, considering Zoom is a $20 billion company now. So this is another one of my things that's really interesting. In some categories of product, the longer somebody uses your product, the more likely they are to have to be obsessed with it. So this is that product market fit score at the top. you can see for this product, and actually this whole category of product, that most people, so only 24% of people, if they've used a product for less than a year, have basically, I'm sorry, the score is 24% on the product market fit. So it doesn't have product market fit in year one. Well, for people that are 1 to 3 years, it jumps up to 50%. And then it gets way stronger over time. So there are certain types of categories where it takes time to get product market fit. So a good example of a category like that would be a product like Notion or Airtable, where you're investing a lot of your time, energy, and content in it for like the first year. And you're like, it's okay, I'm still learning it, it's cool, I'm using it, whatever. And then at some point, you hit a point where you have so much in there that you're invested, it's done. You're not gonna rip that out, you're not gonna go anywhere else, you're just gonna continue using it, and then your sentiment about it gets better. So it's important to know things like that, and that's a really good example of like why long-term really matters, and thinking through, are you in a product where it actually takes a lot of investment and then it gets in people's heads? Okay, this is actually my favorite section because I really feel like people need some help here, and it's where I have a lot of fun helping. So this is about running small experiments. So that's the third step of the process. Once you've done all this learning and you have all the data qualitatively about what's going on, and you want to improve retention. So there's this concept called painted doors to test ideas. Have any of you heard of this concept? Okay. Tony's heard of every concept. That's what I learned today. This is a gentleman from Optimizely, and he basically said, this kind of test is a great low investment way to gather data from your customers and validate the features you decide to build. Sounds exciting. So he explains it as it's an easy way to avoid risk. They get you direct feedback from your customers, immediate results, and qualitative insights you can use to reprioritize engineering resources. That sounds really good. So let's talk about it. So this is my steps on how to basically do basically a process of doing things like painted door tests, which I know you probably still don't know what they are, but you'll find out with an example, which is start with step one, take baby steps, and iterate fast. So oftentimes what happens is, especially when you're adding new features or even in a new product, you're going to do hopefully a bunch of research, get a press release, a blog post, product homepage, or something going so that you're like, okay, this feels good, you iterate it, the team feels good about it, it's backed by the research, and then you want to go build the whole thing. So if it's a feature, this is a little bit easier to do. If it's not a feature, this is a little bit harder to do. So what we did with one of my products, I'll tell you later, but I'm going to give you a couple examples first. So start with step one. So this is my product. It's at usefyi.com, and it helps you find your documents in 3 clicks or less. So when we first built this product, we did a whole bunch of research, and what we learned is that the number one problem people have with documents by far is finding them across all the tools they use. So we're like, okay. So when you think about finding your documents, you're like, oh, I'm going to give people a search box, and they're going to type in the document name, and they'll be able to find their documents. And we're going to connect to all these tools. I've been around long enough to know that it doesn't work that easily, and so we didn't want to go invest in all the time it would take to go build that out if you were to really build it out. And then you get all these thoughts about machine learning and AI and all this cool stuff in your head, and you're like, oh, we could do all this cool stuff. So instead, we decided we were going to build what we call a 5-day MVP. And we also shared this whole story on product habits. And this was a little over a year ago before we launched the product. And what it turns out is when we built the 5-day MVP, you basically we authenticated like the 3 easiest apps you could authenticate, which were G Suite, Dropbox, and Box. And so you connect G Suite, you connect Dropbox, you connect Box, and then you essentially get a search box. And every time you search, we just go to those APIs, get all the results, and show you an interface. And we had like 50 people use it in 2 batches. And what we learned with very little investment was that would get us monthly retention, maybe. Because people would have to remember it exists and all that kind of stuff, and you type in a search box. Well, we're about a year and a half later from that point, and I have a business, and it's not a search box, I promise. You'll kind of see some shots of it in a second, but that 5-day MVP was our baby step. Once we learned this is the number one problem, and then we dug in, we wrote our press release stuff and all that, and thought that was it, we decided that we weren't going to build the whole thing because it would just take a lot of engineering effort. Minimum was like 30 days, but it was probably going to be like more like 3 months because like it's just a lot of work to integrate the stuff, store it all, and then have it hooked up. So what we learned is that if we gave people a search box, and there's a graveyard of products behind us in this space of searching across all the tools and documents and stuff. So we knew that this was a risk, so we decided to do that. So what we realized is that if we built a product and it was a search box, we would fail. And we realized that in literally 5 plus 15 days, but only 5 days of design and engineering time. So it was really cheap to learn. So this mantra has existed with us, and you'll probably just have to go sign up for the product and check it out if you want. That way you can see what we actually ended up with that actually has way better retention than monthly. But in short, we took all the research we did, we mapped all the behaviors that people have of how they find documents, which is not a search box most of the time. That's like the last resort. We have a search box. And we built an interface that maps to all those behaviors pretty much perfectly. And once we shipped that interface is when we started getting the retention because it was hitting on the problem people had. And there's nothing like it. Like nobody's built an interface like this yet. I hope they never do because it's great, but whatever. Great for me. And this is kind of the interface. But so now we need to add a new feature to the product. And we're getting tweets about this feature before we've even built it, and this is what a painted door is. A painted door is basically a fake door. It's a door that exists, you can see it, but if you try to go into it, you don't actually go into the house. It's like you're going into like just land, right? That's essentially a painted door. And so what we did is we show you this painted door where it's like this little plus, and then you hover over it, and then you click it, and then you actually get this box that's like a drift little chat box that says, what were you expecting to happen when you click the plus? Right? That's a painted door. And we're measuring everything. We're measuring the views on this. We're measuring the hovers on each item because this is our product and it's a bunch of documents. And then we're measuring the hover on the plus. We're measuring the click on the plus. So now we know a lot of the metrics that it would have taken a lot more engineering work, which is happening right now because we're going to build this feature, that like would have taken forever, and we still wouldn't have the data. And now we already have data on how to improve this experience or whether it's even viable, whether people are going to see the plus and click on it and all that. We know that. Turns out they will. So that's cool. And it turns out people will tweet about it too, so that's even cooler. So I'll give you an example of how it works in real time because somebody else tweeted about it and shared this GIF. So that's how it works. That's it. It's just you go, you hover, you click, and you're done. So see, you go there, hover on item, click it, and then the box pops up. And that's a painted door. And this feature is like, embarrassingly, I would say this is one of the longest features I've ever worked on. And I don't like working on features that take forever like that. Because just being able to do this, what we want to do with the plus, which I'm not even going to share right now, is like incredibly hard in terms of like the technical feats that need to be surmounted to be able to do that. So we knew we had to do something like this to make sure that it's a good idea, it's the right idea, et cetera, compared to all the other things we could do. So that was step one. So the way we looked at it is that was a step one of the feature we want to build, and we just literally shipped that. And we started getting data already. So that's a painted door. Okay, this is like awesome. Like it's one of my favorite stories, and I haven't seen anyone talk about it, so I'm kind of excited to talk about it for the first time. So this is Pinterest. All of you know Pinterest. You know what they do, right? This is Instagram. So they shipped the baby step. And they shipped this baby step to compete with Pinterest back in December 2016. The baby step was literally that icon. Do any of you remember that icon? Yeah, they shipped it. And when I saw them ship it, I was like, oh, it's coming, it's on. Like, we're done. Like, watch out, Pinterest, for reals. Like, watch out. And all it did was you clicked it, and you saved. And you have this saved thing in your profile. That's it. It didn't take much time for them to build. They have a lot of engineers and people. They could have built a lot more. Why didn't they? It's a fake door. They're trying to make sure that this activity, there's so many levels of this, but they're trying to make sure that this is the right way to compete with Pinterest. This is the right way to build out that functionality. So that was December 2016. So they iterated fast for them. And 4 months later, roughly, they introduced collections. And this is from their blog, they said this stuff. And by then, they said 46% of Instagrammers have saved at least one post. That's why they did it. They were iterating that until they got a metric that mattered to them, and only then did they actually ship the next step. So this is a company that could build the whole thing out. They don't care. Like, they can build the whole thing out. They have lots of money, lots of resources, but they didn't do it this way. So it's not just for startups, it's for anybody. And this is how you think smart about it. And now they have they basically have Pinterest built into Instagram. Whether it competes with Pinterest or not, they basically put their stake in the ground and done it in a way where they're actually getting almost half their users to use it, which is ridiculous. Because basically one of the biggest problems with adding features is you don't get anybody to use them. So these fake doors and these things like that, they help you actually increase engagement in your product for new features instead of just building features that nobody uses, which is what most of us have done, embarrassingly probably all our lives in product. So at least I have. So I vowed not to do that again. And this was great. So a few months later, in August, you have Business Insider, thank you Business Insider, comparing the two. So this is the story for me, which is this is a really large company. They're doing these painted door things, and they have resources, time, money, all kinds of things to do it a better way, if there is a better way. And they're world-class at product. You can think whatever you want about the culture, the company, what it's done, all that, but at the end of the day, they're world-class at product. And look what they did, right? They did it the way we should be doing things, regardless of our size. So big things start small. I can't repeat that enough, especially for product, because we all want to go big. But this is how it works. And that's it. And I have my email because I don't mind getting emails. So it's up there. But you should sign up for producthabits.com, and then you'll get my emails. I'd love for all three of you to introduce yourselves and tell us the name of your favorite product.
Start with me?
Sure.
Hi, thanks for coming. My name is Mark Geller. I'm the co-founder and COO of a company called HappyReturns. We provide in-person returns for online retailers, and more broadly just are addressing the number one pain point in e-commerce, which is returns. My background is actually all in product management, so one of the things I focus a lot on at HappyReturns is our product, and I'm sort of the active head of product. And we'll talk more about that as we go. But a product that I've been using a lot more recently is the Audible app. I had used it once a couple of years ago and listened to a book, and that was great. Kind of set it aside. And recently, I'm not sure, actually a friend who's here with me today recommended this, a big long language lecture series, and that was on Audible, and I found that really interesting, and I realized that at my advancing age, it is much easier to listen to books fast than to read them. And so I've taken to reading books or listening to books, and so I'm using it much more frequently, and it seems to line up really well with walking my dog. And a thought that I had while I was watching your talk was, if you can find a way to make a product that fills the space of people walking their dogs, you've probably got a really good chance at building a habit.
My name is Keya Patel. I am the lead product manager for monetization at Headspace. Headspace focuses on getting people to meditate, and that's how we started. We now also focus on sleep and other verticals that are periphery to meditation as well. At Headspace, I focus on getting people to pay for the product and then stay with the product or retain. And so my team focuses on conversion, retention, and churn. And that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. In terms of a product that I use pretty regularly, I live and breathe by Todoist. How many of you know what that is? Yeah, okay. So I know there's a lot of other apps out there like Wunderlist, Evernote, but for me, Todoist is similar to what Hiten was talking about earlier, where I started putting my life in it, and suddenly it's taken over to the point where it told me that I need to renew my passport this week. So the fact that I know that just from Todoist, and I no longer have to remember that, makes it just embedded in my life, and that's why it's important to me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hila. I work at the company Acorns. I'm the head of growth. I manage both user acquisition and growth product. So I kind of struggle throughout this session because there is identity issue, whether I'm a marketing person or I'm a product person.
Welcome to the club.
I know. Previously, I I worked in analytics, kind of product manager in a bunch of different roles. And I actually majored biology in college as well, where I do a lot of small and big experiments, which caused kind of accidents, such as explosion stuff. So I decided that's not what my thing. So I mess up with like digital products in marketing and experiments in product now. My favorite product, actually, I want to say Audible, but you use that already. I don't actually like it, but I use it. And I use a bunch of other podcast tools, both in Chinese, because I listen in Chinese, and in English. I listen to Startup Chat as well.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
That's my podcast.
I know. It's a good one. So kind of going to the retention topic, I think the reason why I don't love them, but I still use them because I find a daily routine around them. Every day when I drive to work, when I drive back, I listen to them. So it's just, it's not good, but it's valuable and it's part of my life now.
Awesome. So I have a quick question, which is how fast do you listen to these things? Is it 1x, 2x, 3x? What's up?
1.75.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Depends on what's being read and how fast, but that 1.5 to 1.75. Yeah.
Okay. How about you?
I use the regular.
Regular? Okay, just check.
You speak pretty fast in your podcast.
You are 1.75.
I'm 2 to 3x. Sometimes all the way up to 3x, yeah. Okay, thanks. All right, so we're going to jump right into it. So we're going to start real basic. I don't know if I answered this question, so why is retention so important for a product? Anybody can answer. Not everyone has to. There's no requirements here. Not like product requirements.
Well, I mean, generally speaking, I would say if you don't have good product retention, there's a very good chance you haven't built a good product, and that's inherently bad, and it's going to be bad for your business. In our world, so we're what you could call a B2B2C company. So our actual customers who pay us money are online retailers and big omni-channel retailers. But we are a consumer-facing brand as well. So we are interacting with their customers, sometimes as our brand, sometimes as theirs. And we're operating in a fairly small universe. There are on the order of hundreds of kind of companies. We're focused on retailers kind of $50 million and up. There aren't millions of those. There are hundreds, maybe a couple thousand of them. So it's very important for us to sign up as many of them as we can and keep all of them as customers. And if we don't do that successfully, we'll be out of business pretty quickly. So short version of it, I would say, is if your retention rate is low, it's going to impact the overall trajectory of your company, and your company will ultimately be less profitable and less valuable, period.
I think the only thing I'd add to that, I think that's very much from like a business profitability standpoint. I think the other point of view is you're probably not meeting your users' needs, which is ultimately what's most important for me as a PM at the end of the day. So if I'm not meeting their needs, then they're not going to retain. I'm not hitting their goals as well. So with Headspace specifically, if we're not getting people to come back for repeat sessions or meditations, we're ultimately not reaching this need that they might have wanted with Headspace initially.
Yeah, I think basically if you don't have retention, you have like kind of a bucket that's leaking water in the bottom. You can keep buying new users. In a way, acquisition, new users can be bought. If you have money, you can buy them. But retention cannot be bought. You have to be solving a real problem and kind of keep them there. So it's almost like the ultimate answer. And also, as Hiten mentioned, if you don't make money yet, if you have retention, at least you have time to figure it out. But if you don't even have retention, then you basically have nothing.
Well, there's some really good quotes in there. Okay, so now we're going to get a little more complex. How do you find the levers for improving retention for a product? Because I don't actually think I talked about that.
Am I going to go first every time?
Anyone can go. I don't get to pick. Yeah, I have no control.
I can go first this time. So I think there's basically two ways that I think about this. The first, it's basically both looking at qual and quant data. So on the quant side, luckily with Headspace and other at Dropbox where I was previous to Headspace, we have enough data from our users to understand what actions they need to take in their first X amount of days to retain for longer. So I think the classic example people give is with Facebook, you need to make 3 friends or 5 friends in your first week in order for longer term retention. But that's basically what I look for at Headspace when I started, when we didn't really have those metrics at all. So for us, it was knowing that you had to actually meditate 2 times in your first week in order to return in week 2. So finding that number allowed us to then create a feature around setting a goal where we recommended you have to meditate twice in your first week. So by doing that, that's kind of like the quant side. On the qual side, if I don't have kind of like the user data and that portion, where at a smaller company you might not have that. It's understanding from a qual perspective why people are actually leaving the product or churning from it in order to then address that more proactively. So if someone's leaving because maybe like the price is too high, that's actually probably not a real reason for why they're leaving. It's something value-based that's causing them to leave. So in a cancellation survey, if the reason that someone gives is the price is too high, I would then either call that person or contact them through our design research folks and be able to understand and dive into what actually caused that to be the reason of a price is too high, and then start to fix that earlier in the funnel.
One thing I can add is really there are a lot of CRM channels, as for example, push notification, emails. Those are really good tools to build habit. Basically, you want to understand what is the natural frequency of your product. For example, Headspace, maybe it's a weekly thing. Facebook, maybe it's a daily thing. And some SaaS software, it might be monthly. And you want to understand, like, that's the right frequency, and you want to train your customers to use your product in that frequency. And those CRM channels are a nice way to send them that reminder, bring them back, and to build that habit. And the other thing is kind of you want to understand within your product if it's more complicated or have multiple product lines. Are there different features or different use cases that are better than others? Kind of move people towards those higher frequency features or higher frequency use cases. And even driving them to adopt more use cases is sometimes a good idea. For example, I learned from some friends at Lyft that they identified there are different use cases for Lyft. Some people use it for commute. Some people use it for like after going to bar, getting drunk, kind of take a cab. And there are just different ways, but they figured out through data and research that if someone use 2 use cases, that person is more likely to retain than someone only use 1 use case. So kind of, if you have multiple use cases or features, that's another way to drive attention as well.
I just add, in our case, it's in terms of retaining end users, a lot of it is about directly asking people. Early on in the company, we would just, we have everyone's email address because we're doing returns for them. And we would just send out invitations to take a short survey, and we would just ask them, what were the main reasons why you stopped using, just a multiple choice question with an other kind of thing. The other thing we do that is just kind of an ongoing, all the time thing for us is we use NPS surveys, sort of consistently. We use delighted.com to send surveys. So every person who does a return in our service gets a Delighted survey, and we have very high response rate, and we monitor those completely. So we actually, fortunately, we do pretty well there, so we don't get a lot of negative responses, but anyone who is anything other than a promoter, so anyone less than 9 or 10, we reach out to them individually every single time and ask them. And probably about half the time we'll actually respond, and there are many different reasons why they might have had a bad experience, some of which might have been due to us, some of which might have been due to the retailer or whatever. So we're just totally obsessive about, we want to know, and people are very forthcoming in the comments, positive or negative, and we want to know why are people loving it and why are they not, and those translate directly to retention.
Thanks. Okay, so I like stories, so I'd like all of you to tell us a story about when you were trying to trying to improve retention and what you did about it.
I can start this time. So that it's a struggle to speak after them because they speak all the great ideas and hints. And
so you wanted to go first this time,
yes.
huh? Oh, okay. First half is that.
Yeah, so actually when I was first hired at Acorns, I was hired as a director of retention. And I think the job description is really about sending users 1,000 emails to bring them back to use the product. But because of my previous background, I kind of have PM analytics background as well. I went through kind of the data trying to look for opportunities. I realized that the opportunities in product itself is actually much more and much bigger than trying to utilize those CRM channels. So I did a couple of things. The first thing I did is actually step back, understand what retention means for our product. Like retention, in the easiest way is kind of, do people come back? But that's a really kind of surface level definition. For Acorns, we are an investment product, right? Do people have to actually come back to this product? Because it's like passive investing. And do they have to be investing? So we define that as retention. Or if they have a high enough balance, even though they don't keep investing, they don't log it back anymore, it's okay, right? So the first thing I did is actually trying to understand and find the right definition for retention. That's the first step, because if that's not right, anything you do doesn't matter. You may go towards a completely wrong direction. From there, I kind of did something similar to what Keya mentioned, because there are different steps to improve retention. I almost think retention is like a relationship. You have to start a relationship. The first impression is so important. So that's kind of new user onboarding and activation. And then you have to maintain it. Kind of there's this ongoing whether you have like weekly meetup or weekly dating, whatever, like you have some regular frequency of interaction. And the long-term retention is really you find value and fit with this person. So it's actually, there are different stages. And usually what I see is that new user onboarding is some place that has a lot of opportunity. And it is actually the case for Acorns as well, because new user onboarding is typically an area that marketers feel like their job is done, and product teams feel like they are busy building all the fancy features. So all those new customers are just like get into the product, feel like, what should I do? Like, what? So like I kind of use a similar methodology. I trying to understand, I trying to identify customers who retained and also customers who don't retain, and understand in their early first like 7-day behaviors, what are the difference? What are the things that someone did and they retained? What are the things someone didn't do that and they didn't retain? Kind of find that differentiator, and I identified some behavior that actually make a huge difference. And what I go from there is trying to understand what are the different ways I can drive that behavior, because there could be multiple ways user can use a feature or adopt a feature. There are different passes in the product. I laid out, there are 6 passes. People can do that. For example, I laid all them out, and I find the one that has potentially the biggest opportunity to improve, and did that. And I go back to understand, does actually drive a difference in the final retention, and it did. Kind of that finally proved this is not just simple correlation, it's actually causation. When I drive more people to do that, actually they retain better. And from there is kind of another 100 small experiments trying to continue to iterate on that thread as well.
You kind of took a little bit of my idea.
That's why I tried to go first this time.
I thought of a different one.
So you're out of ideas?
No, I thought of a different one in the meantime. I'll give you actually a really specific example, but it's pretty applicable at places that are subscription businesses. So if you think of Spotify, or Amazon, they have a monthly product, Spotify Premium, but then if you think about it, Spotify does not have an annual product, whereas Amazon Prime does have an annual product. And similar to that, at Headspace and even at Dropbox, some of the experiments that I've run have focused on actually shifting people from a monthly product to an annual product, so changing your billing plan. Because folks who are on an annual plan or even longer than that, maybe like a family plan, which is a different type of plan that Spotify and Headspace both have, allows people to be retained for longer. Because basically something about the plan, the duration, or with a family plan, having the investment of your family in it, causes people to retain for longer. So the way we tested this at Dropbox was when people were starting on a monthly subscription, within 2 months or so was when we would show them an upsell message via an in-app modal, and then also through a push notification and an email, where we would encourage them to sign up for the annual product, which was a savings of about 17%. So when you put it in the perspective of saving a cup of coffee a month, or being able to break that down for the user, they're able to pretty easily understand why they should upgrade to that annual product, which is helpful to them, but also helpful to us ultimately to be able to get them to a longer term, or the product that allows them to retain for longer.
I don't know if I have a great story about retention. I can, but I can point out a couple things. The first thing is, so we're in kind of an interesting business. Our company, we had this idea, my co-founder and I, while we were at a company called Hotlook, which was acquired by Nordstrom, and we started this program called Return to Rack, mostly as a marketing program just to get the Hotlook logo up there with the Nordstrom Rack logo, where you could buy something on Hotlook.com, and if you wanted to return it, you had the option to not go to the post office and instead take it to a Nordstrom Rack store. And we didn't think most people were going to use it. There was very little crossover, et cetera. And long story short, within 6 months, we saw that 70% of all our returns were coming back through the Nordstrom Rack stores, and that was kind of our aha moment. So we had that background when we started the company, and so for us, retention hasn't been as sort of big a challenge because what we were doing was competing with a process that was super painful for people and they really don't like. If you have a chance to build a business where people already do this thing, they're already buying things online, they need to return them, and the process is just painful, and this is sort of starting backwards from the customer, I guess. If you can offer them a way to do that is just much less painful, you've got a good start. For us, it's really about, so once people try our service, they're like, wow, that was a lot better than the previous experience, and so they tend to be pretty excited about it. And for us, it's really about sort of staying top of mind. And so we work a lot with our retailers. The retailers are the ones who actually tell their shoppers about our service, so they're doing it while they're in the flow of returning. So we do a couple things. The first is we actually offer an online branded return flow for the retailer. It's a really excellent experience for the customer, and it also gives us the chance to promote ourselves within that flow. And there are various other touch points that the retailers have. These range from on the website to dedicated emails, and one that's turned out to be really effective is inbox inserts. And so one of the things that we've done that you can think about is it's hard to get the retailer to say, hey, why don't you spend $20,000 to see if inbox inserts are going to incent more people to come to the return bars, which are less expensive for you. And instead, what we will often do is we'll pay for the first one. So we'll pay for an insert, and they can see the performance of it. And then when they see the lift in adoption, and they're seeing how many incremental people are now going to the return bars instead of returning by mail, and how much money they're saving, then the idea is that they take over these different touch points, they get more excited about it, and then they get behind and they have motivation and the data that they need to be able to drive those programs internally and help essentially improve our retention and people continuing to use our service once they've tried it.
All right, so my phone is gone, so I'm going to go off script. Are y'all ready? Just kidding. So I was going to go off script anyway, so you folks were in trouble. What I find most valuable when we have people like this, before we get into the questions, I think we have a little bit of time for that. So I've only got one more, even though I did have two more, so I'm improvising. I've never done improv. It sounds fun. Okay, so what's really valuable when we have folks like this is for them to tell us what they would tell us if we had a coffee meeting with them, like the number one thing they would tell us about retention. So one way is like, what's killing my retention? is one way to do it, if that's how you want to do it. Another way to do it would be, what's the number one thing you'd suggest, not even generically, but based on your recent experience with product and retention, monetization, and marketing too. What's the number one thing you'd suggest that somebody thinks about or does to improve retention? So you can talk about the killer thing that's going to kill your retention, or like the number one thing you see people do that kills your retention, or a tip, because that's what I would ask you if I were having coffee meetings with you folks and talking about retention.
So what I would say, and I would say this, I think it's directly applicable to retention, but I would say, just this is my general advice about product, is try to look at your product really kind of brutally as a otherwise totally disinterested stranger, and try to view your eyes from the perspective of someone who just doesn't otherwise care about your product, and maybe as it relates to retention, ask yourself, is there at least one thing about my product or my experience that when someone uses it, it is just awesome? You know, you can think of it as the moment of delight. For us, it is when they finish the return at a return bar, they didn't have to do a box or packing tape or print a label or go to the post office or wait 7 days or pay $10. They hand it to a person. The person says, boop, they press a button, they're done, and on their phone, they instantly get the email that says, your return is approved and your refund has been initiated. And for us, that's that moment of delight where they're like, oh my God, I'm done? It was that simple? And that's why our NPS scores are very high, and that's why our retention is very high. Because there is that moment when people are like, now that I've done this, I never want to do it a different way. And I think there are probably a lot of products where you don't necessarily have to have that if they're more automatic products. But if you have that, you've got a very good chance at having very good retention to just be memorable, where someone's like, wow, that was awesome. I'm going to use this again. I'm going to tell everyone I can find because that was awesome. So you want to have at least one moment in your product clearly where it's just a fantastic experience.
I think I'm going to answer the question that you didn't ask, which was on the doc. But it's basically...
Now she's going off
script. The question was, what's new in retention and what to look for? And I think...
Cheater.
The answer to that I've been noticing quite a bit is I think people are getting really frustrated by the monopolies of Google, Apple, Amazon. And as a result of that, I've been noticing a lot of companies are looking into loyalty via bundling together. So an example of this recently is like Spotify and Hulu partnering together, or Hulu and T-Mobile, even to some extent like HappyReturns and Everlane, or basically these brands kind of like coming together to be whatever is considered as God right now. So these types of bundling projects allow for companies to basically be able to take over or fight back against some of these larger people in the ecosystem or in the space. And that also, from a retention point of view, allows additional brand loyalty. So an example of that is today Headspace announced a bundle with NBA. And as part of that, we basically tapped into this audience of folks who are interested in movement and sports and performance, and showing our existing user base that we actually can get them to return or engage and retain as a result of the sports-related content now, which otherwise would not have happened without this type of bundle or partnership.
So I think what's killing retention is usually the number one kind of reason is the product doesn't solve a valuable enough problem from the very beginning. It's just not that valuable. It's kind of okay. It's nice to have. It's not must have. And then people try it once and they don't use it anymore, which is actually a lot of times the case. The number two reason I saw is companies don't even know it. They get so excited, as kind of Hiten Shah in the first example, seeing the DAU, MAU going up, where they don't know actually they just spend a lot of marketing dollar to bring those new customers while their existing customers base is actually churning out, so they don't even know. The third one, I think, in my experience, people just getting less and less time in using different apps, and a lot of the super apps like Instagram, Facebook here in US, in China, WeChat, and all those stuff. Basically, you can do most things there, and you don't need any other app anymore. So it's very hard for smaller apps to compete with those ones. That's why you mentioned the bundling as kind of one way. And I think what I saw new to solve retention is that off script or
You can ask whatever you want. Or you can answer whatever you want.
Okay. So what I saw something that's not really new, but it's kind of becoming more popular is companies or product with less frequent use case build some new features that's higher frequency. For example, Redfin, they have like your home value just increased. Wow, so happy, and click that email, go check and see some other nearby homes as well, right? So that's pretty smart. But I saw actually in China, a lot of companies taking this to the extreme, like the browser in China all have like a reader, like novel reader features, and you can read novels in your browser, and it's for free. So you retain, right? Like you have this added benefit, and it's much more higher frequency than browser itself. And also a lot of like product build a mini game inside. So you raise a chicken or pet, whatever. So it's kind of silly, but it actually keep you there. So, and I saw so many apps adding content aspect, adding social aspect. Those are typically very highly sticky features. So regardless what the original product is, but they are trying to build those new features to retain people. So kind of to the extreme, it can be a little bit ridiculous, but like at least at the short term, it works for a while.
Yeah, thanks for the Redfin example. I think that was great. That was my point about going to a daily use case or something more frequent. So that's really cool. How about a hand for our panelists?